Good afternoon, and good morning to our friends out west. I'm Maura Sweeney, Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. This is the next installment in our series of webinars covering a broad range of career development topics. Today, I'm excited to welcome Sheila Murphy, partner and co-founder of Flex Professionals. We'll be together for an hour. Sheila will speak, and we'll then take questions from you for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation by checking out the question function located on your webinar toolbar to the right. Also included in the toolbar are a few handouts that are available to download. Before I turn things over to Sheila, I would like to poll the audience to give everyone an idea of who's participating today. Our first question is, what is your current work status? Take a few seconds to collect those answers. Take a few more seconds. All right, I will close and share the results. So it shows that about 22% are currently working but considering a break or transition. 33% are on a career break less than 5 years. 13% on a career break 5 to 10 years. And 33% on a career break more than 10 years. So that's a good even distribution. The next question that I'll launch is to get a sense of what type of work arrangements do you most desire. Take a few seconds to complete that. Looks like about everyone submitted their answers. So I'll share those results. About 25% looking for full-time work, 54% looking for part-time, and 21% focused on project work. Great. Thank you very much. That is great insight to start with. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Sheila.
Great. Thanks, Maura. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sheila Murphy, and I am one of 3 owners of a company called Flex Professionals. I do a lot of speaking and training on work flexibility and also on career reentry after a long hiatus, usually. And I'm happy to be here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. First of all, just going to quickly introduce myself and my company so you have some background about where I'm coming from when we talk about this topic of reentering the workforce. And then I'm going to move on to very quickly talking to you a little bit about if you reenter today, what would it be like and how different it would be from when possibly you had left the workforce many years ago. And then I'm going to talk about top concerns of job seekers and employers with regard to reentry, some tips for successful reentry. That will be the bulk of the presentation. And then at the very end and throughout, we're going to talk about confidence because that's a huge piece of this conversation for most people. So a little bit about me. I have a background in project management consulting, working mostly for federal government contractors. After 15 years of working, I worked full-time with my first child. I worked part-time with my second child and had an unbelievably flexible job. And I was young and had no clue how great I had it. And when I had my third child, I left the workforce entirely. And I had a career gap of only 5 years. But while I was on career break, my husband died at the age of 42, and I had 3 children under the age of 8 at home with me. And my motivation for reentering, luckily I had life insurance and it wasn't primarily to pay my mortgage, but I really felt that my children needed to see somebody in their household working. And through a conversation on the beach, actually with a friend of mine from college, we kind of talked about the idea that there were so many talented people out there that wanted flexibility, and that was the barrier for them for going back to meaningful work. And so we set out to start a company that essentially sold this concept of part-time work to businesses and sold this untapped talent pool of highly experienced professionals who wanted to be engaged, but just not full-time. And so that's how Flex Professionals was born. And we basically work with mostly with candidates like you, professionals that have a tremendous amount of experience, who have left the workforce, or who are looking to scale back or to transition to something new. And we source in all aspects of business functions within an organization. So when I usually do this, this presentation live in a workshop format, I usually go around the room and I ask the people who are listening how to give me a little bit of information about their professional background. And when I do that, I would say 9 out of every 10 participants tells me, as a way of introducing themselves and their professional background, they tell me how long they've been out of work. And my guess is that if I did the same thing here, the statistic would remain valid. So what I would like to start with would be to tell you that let today be the very last day that you define who you are professionally by the amount of years that you have been out of work. Most of the candidates we work with have been out at least 10 to 15 years on average. So those of you, the 33% of you that have been out less than 5 years, kudos to you for being here. It's going to make your reentry easier. And for the 45% that have been out more than 5 years, we're glad you're here. You will receive lots of tips in terms of how to successfully reenter. But what I do want to leave you with as your very most important takeaway is that no one is going to hire you because of the amount of years you've been out of work. So don't even start there, don't end there, and don't even mention it as you talk about reentering, whether it be in an interview or through your resume. And we'll get into more of those specifics later. So I don't have to tell you that incredible amount has changed since, if you have left the workforce even 10, 15 years ago, so much has changed. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm just going to go and talk a little bit about what it looks like right now. If you're considering reentering, you're doing it at a good time. The labor market is tightening and many companies are reporting difficulty finding qualified talent. These stats are probably even lower right now. You're also going to find changing demographics. By 2020, the Department of Labor estimates that the millennials will comprise over half of the workforce. So what does this mean for you? You're very likely going to be interviewed by somebody younger than you. You will likely be supervised by somebody who's younger than you. There's also, for the first time, 3 generations in the workforce. So there's a lot of diversity in the workforce right now in terms of generations. There's a rise of female college grads, and surprisingly, there's also a shrinking female workforce. That is in part because there are more females in college, but it's also because a lot of women are still opting out. Another thing that you're going to find as you enter is this new, what we call a gig economy, or an on-demand economy. And by 2020, which is not that far away, the number of what we call contingent workers is going to outpace the number of full-time workers. What does this mean? There's going to be fewer W-2 traditional employees in the workplace, and there's going to be more contractors, temp workers, 1099s, outsourced workers. Those are going to make up the chunk of the workforce. So what does this mean for you? I think in some ways it's a terrible thing, because if you are looking for full-time with benefits, I think it's going to be more and more challenging to find those types of traditional roles. And our society right now, this gig economy is growing, yet our policies have not kept up pace. And I think at some point we really need to look at our healthcare system so that this gig economy works for everybody. But the advantage to many of you, you have been surviving, probably because you have a partner or spouse that is working full time. And so you don't have, you have those health benefits. The benefits piece of this is not as important to you. And so this gig economy in some ways can be a good way for you to get back in, because you can sell to employers the fact that you may not need benefits. This is a no-brainer these days. Who desires flexibility? The bottom line, everybody desires it. So flexibility is becoming a growing trend. I would still say that most jobs are not flexible, but companies like us are proof that the trend is growing and that you can actually sell flexibility and this part-time work model successfully. So for those of you that are looking for part-time, I think it's very hopeful that you will find that work, particularly if you work through a type of company like ours. You're also going to find a huge pay gap. Career gaps, particularly for women, are very costly. We are living longer, which means we have to work longer. And unfortunately, those of us that leave the workforce leave at a time when most men see significant pay jumps in their careers. And so while this is sort of a depressing slide, I always like to look at the flip side, which is some of you, when you re-enter, you are going to be attractive to an employer because your pay rate most likely is going to be more affordable than someone else's that has been continuously working. So in some ways that's going to be attractive. Plus, because of your age and because of your prior work experience, you have all the soft skills that employers are looking for. So do not forget about those soft skills in terms of your communications, your ability to prioritize, your ability to have good judgments, be able to quickly make a sound judgment. Those are all really important skills that employers are looking for. And those are things that you should be selling. And lastly, there's a huge talk in the industry now about this growing skills gap, which basically means that technology is outpacing many companies' ability to train their own employees. And so they have all of these jobs openings that are highly technical, and they cannot find the right people with the right skill sets to fill those jobs. And while I know most of you are saying in your head, well, that's great, but I don't have the technology skills, what I would like for you is to look at this as an opportunity. Many of you don't have the technology skills that the current employers are looking for, but there's a lot of programs out there, some expensive and some not so expensive, to learn the types of skills that are needed. And so while you're on career break, one thing that you can think about is how can I use this time to take a class, possibly at a slower pace than if you were at school, full time, but to take classes so that your technology skills are up to speed when you do decide to get back in. And here's just a quick slide about where the growth is. This is where 75% of projected growth is by 2020. And if you look at all of these industries, the reason why I put this slide up is you might look at this and say, oh, I have no experience in healthcare, so forget that one. I want you to open your eyes and think of it a little bit more broadly, like maybe you have sales skills. Healthcare industry needs people with sales skills, or maybe you have project management skills or accounting skills. The leisure and hospitality industry needs those types of people too. So this is a good kind of first cut at possible industries and companies that you could start to network with when you try to get back in. Here's just a quick slide about the data sources for the prior slides if anyone's interested in learning more. Now I'm going to go into top concerns for those reentering the workforce and for employers as well. But I think, Maura, did you want to pull up another poll?
Absolutely. So here's another poll. What are your motivations for participating in today's webinar? A few more seconds, let a few more people finish. Great, looks like about everyone voted. So the results show that 62% are looking for reentry tips, 22% are worried their technology skills are outdated, 41% are concerned about finding a job with that flexibility, and 59% are considering a change of career.
Okay, cool, thanks, that's helpful. Okay, top concerns for reentry. Readiness. This is the big one. Am I ready? And you ought to be making sure that your family is ready too if you haven't thought about that. We have stories of reentry candidates that get hired and they're so excited, and their first day on the job, it snows, and their kids have off from school and they freak out and they end up not even showing up for their first day of work because they haven't thought through a plan for what you're going to do. And I would say you need a plan A and a plan B in terms of school holidays, vacations, etc., pickups. And the way I would describe this, I basically know when a candidate is truly ready to reenter when they come and interview with us, and they often say they've got the itch and they are willing to make sacrifices to their daily schedule and to alter their family's schedules and make family sacrifices in order to get back to work. Those are the candidates that we sell to clients because we know that they are committed. So even if you don't feel that way right now, it's good that you're here because you're going to learn a lot in terms of how important it is to get to that point. The technology gap is a second concern, and it should be. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Lack of confidence is a huge concern for reentry. Uncertainty of career focus or desire to change focus. Absence of a professional network, and we're going to hit all of these. And lastly, outdated industry knowledge. So what's interesting is if you talk about top concerns of employers, many of them overlap. So what's the employer concerned about? They're concerned that you are not committed to their company or to the job. So the more you talk about your children in an interview, and I know you know that you shouldn't do it, but people do it all the time because you're nervous, and that's what you end up doing. The more you talk about your need for flexibility, and this goes into the part-time aspect for those of you that are looking for part-time work, you have to hook them with your talent. So don't start by saying, I'm looking for part-time. Hook them with your talent and then use the ability to have a flexible schedule or flexible job location as a negotiating tool to get what you want. Employers are concerned about the technology gap. Most of our candidates that are reentry, where the job does not work out, it's often because the employer feels like they could not get up to speed fast enough and that the technology gap was too wide and that the employer was spending too much time training them on things that they should have already known prior to stepping foot in the office. And again, a lack of confidence is another top concern. Employers aren't going to hire you if they feel like you're not confident. And so it's really important as you start today to change your mindset and to stop filling your brain up with all that, what I call brain junk about, oh my gosh, I've been out so long, my skills are so outdated. You have to start switching your mindset. When you start to tell people that you're thinking about getting back in, instead of talking about the barriers, and I know they exist, you need to start talking about what you bring to the table, the skills that you have, the things that you like to do, the things that you are good at, and your accomplishments. That's how you need to start to brand yourself, not by the challenges and the number of years out. Overqualified. For those of you, there are quite a few questions about transitioning and about age discrimination that came up, or that Maura gave me. Overqualified is a concern of employers, and our recommendation to you is if you are interested in a job that you feel you look like you're overqualified for, because perhaps when you left the workforce 8 years ago, you were the director of human resources, and now you just want a job to step back in, to ease back in, to be an HR generalist. Our suggestion to you is that you hit it head on with the employer. So don't wait until the end of the interview, or don't wait for them to say, gee, we think you're overqualified, therefore we're not going to interview you. Address it in your cover letter and address it in the interview itself before the question is asked. And so a way of doing this is saying, I know you think I'm overqualified for this job, but, and after the but, you're to talk about how excited you are for that job and why you want that job. And it could be because you've been there, done that. You've managed 25 employees before. You don't want a supervisory role. It could be that you really want a job where you can do the job well, that you don't have to take the work home with you. There are many things that you can say, and honesty, I think, in some ways is the best policy here. But tell them that you're excited, no matter what, that express an excitement for working for that company and why that job excites you as well. And that usually wins them over. Okay, so moving on to some more tips for reentry. One of the things that I find when we interview or talk with those that are not just reentering, but transitioning as well, they know they want to reenter or transition, but they have a very hard time sometimes telling me what it is they want to do next. And while I don't think you have to know exactly what you want to do, I actually think if you know the exact job, sometimes you're narrowing yourself too much. It's really important, though, that you know the skills that you have that you want to use in your next job. That is really critical. And it's also important that you know your key personality traits that you have. So if you go onto Flex Professional's website, there's contact information at the end of this webinar with our web address on it. There's an entire section called Job Seeker Resources. And on there are tons of free resources and links to free resources related to all the different areas in the job search. And the first area is self-exploration, self-assessment. And there are worksheets on there for personality traits, very simple ones that come from career centers at universities. And my suggestion to you is, even if you know what your top personality traits are or your top skills are, go and use these worksheets and do them. It's a great way of gaining confidence that you truly have the skills that you think you have, or it's a great way of doing some exploration to figure out what your top skills are. And when you do talk about your skills to an employer, I always say to my workshop participants, sometimes you have to simplify it for people. People are lazy readers, and in many ways our societies we're becoming lazy listeners. And if you tell them you're great at business development, marketing, client relationship development, lead generation, doing presentations, public speaking. That's too much. And people then conclude that they can't figure out what it is you're good at, or they think you're all over the place. So my suggestion here is when you do your resume, when you think about networking, limit your skills to your top 2 or 3. You can always switch them in or out, but I would limit them to 2 or 3, and the same thing with your personality traits. It really helps. And then finally, it's important for you to think about what motivates you. What do you value in terms of work? Are you the kind of person that really likes challenging work in a fast-paced setting? Or are you someone who is better in a collaborative environment, or in an environment where you like to be in the back office and you like to have one specific task and you like to be an independent worker? There's no right or wrong answer, but it's really important that you ask yourselves these questions. And again, in the same section of our website, there are worksheets to help you get to these decisions. Do you want a mission-driven environment? Do you want a startup environment? Are you better off in a siloed position at a large company? Or are you more of a jack-of-all-trades person, which is better suited for a smaller business? So think about these things, because they're going to impact your career choices, but they're also going to impact how you network and what types of companies you explore. Here's just some more information in terms of after you explore what you value and what you're good at and what skills you bring to the table, you're going to want to start to explore careers and industries that are suited to your personality type and to what you want to do. And these are some websites here that have great resources for doing this. The top one is a free 60-question online test. It's fun to do. It asks you the strangest questions. You're not supposed to answer the question with regard to how much money you would make or whether or not you have the skills to do the job. You're supposed to just, from your gut, say, yeah, that would be something I'd love to do, or, oh God, I'd hate to do that. After you take the 60-question test, it probably takes about 10 minutes. It will spit out for you types of careers that are aligned with your personality type. So it's a good place to start. And before I go into this slide, I would just say, if you find that this piece of it, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I'm good at? If this is the piece that's really challenging for you, this is where sometimes a career coach can be very helpful. And if you are interested in using a career coach, you can certainly contact me and I can give you some connections for career coaches that work with career reentry professionals. There's a lot of career coaches out there, so you ought to be interviewing them and making sure that the person is a good fit for you. Okay, onward to technology. This is a really important one. No longer does saying in a cover letter, an interview, that you pick up technology quickly and you are confident that you can come up to speed, you learn things quickly, that type of response is no longer, doesn't work anymore. So my suggestion to you is that as part of your job search process, or if you are on career break and not sure you want to go back quite yet, you take this time to improve your basic technology skills. You need to go into the interview, you need to have them listed on your resume as being proficient. And so what are these? Microsoft Office, basic proficiency in, or intermediate proficiency in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. For some jobs, like some admin jobs or some program management jobs, you might not need advanced or even intermediate for Excel. You might just need basic. So depending upon the job, the level of proficiency might be different, but you at least need to be proficient in those 3 softwares. You need to be familiar with a business email platform and calendaring tool. So Outlook and Gmail, Google Business are probably the two I would say are the best platforms to master. I don't think you need to master both. One is plenty. Just as a side note, if you have an AOL account, it's a good indicator that you're an older worker and may not be tech savvy. Google and Yahoo are probably the more used email providers these days in terms of business. When I talk about calendaring tools, I often interview reentry candidates and I'll say to them, do you know how to use an email calendaring tool? And they say, yeah. And I say to them, how do you use it? And they kind of look at me with a blank stare. And I will say to them, sometimes they'll say, well, I just input my, if I have an event, I input it into my calendar on my phone. And I say to them, well, have you ever invited people to a meeting? Do you have multiple calendars? Do you sync calendars together? Can you color code events according to, person or subject area? Those are the kinds of things that businesses use the calendaring tool for. So learning those types of things is really important. The extent to which you have apps for efficiencies, like for taking notes, for reminders, for making yourself more organized, and you use those apps on your phone, that's important. Video conferencing, everybody should know and be comfortable with Skype. Do not be surprised if your first interview is a phone interview or a Skype interview. So get comfortable using those. On our website, under interviews, we have a good little handout about phone interviews and video interviews. They are very different, and we have a good handout about that on our website, good tips. Make sure you know more than one internet browser, that you're familiar. We've got to have a lot of candidates have gone on, and the company has a different internet browser, and it stymies them. Make sure you understand how browsers work. Again, same thing for social media. I would say most importantly is getting on LinkedIn and being, if you are on LinkedIn and you have at least 250, I would even say 500 connections, and you have your picture on there, your profile is 100% done, and you are following people and liking things and sharing things, if an employer goes on, they are going to know that you have that they're going to assume that you're tech savvy. That's what you want them to assume. So get on LinkedIn if you're not on there. And lastly, I would say troubleshooting. A big comment from employers is they want people that can figure out how to do something if they have a software issue or they need to learn how to do something in terms of technology. They can figure out how to do it themselves before they go to their help desk or to the IT staff or to their supervisor. You can Google anything. Get comfortable when you are in a work environment. Try to remember to Google something first and to try to figure it out on your own before you go to your supervisor or IT person. It's really important. And then the second part of this technology is, actually I should say a continuation here. You can take a skills assessment test. For $20, you can go to this website here called Total Testing. You can take a test on QuickBooks, on any of the Microsoft Office tools, on other software, and it's a great way for you, number one, for $20 to assess where you are, but the results that are provided to you are so detailed that you will know exactly what you need to learn in order to become proficient. So my suggestion is that you do this. You can take an advanced, a beginner, an intermediate, but you can also take like a general test that has a little bit of each in the test. It is a great way to get confidence, and it'll give you almost like a blueprint of what you need to learn. And then you can basically go online. You can go on YouTube and you can learn these different skills yourself. Another thing that's important, somebody had asked a question about this, about how, I have sales skills, but how do I make myself relevant to today. Sales is a good example of this. Probably how you sell hasn't changed much, but the technology behind selling has. It's a good idea for your field to go and to talk to people about what types of technology their companies use. I do not recommend you spend hundreds or thousands of dollars to buy a new software or to take a training on a specific software, because there's so much software out there and so many different companies use different softwares, especially depending upon the size of the company. So I'm not saying that you do that, but you at least go out there and learn about what the top, for example, project management tools are. Basecamp is one of them. Basecamp is free. You can go online and you can get tutorials, you can download Basecamp and you can learn how to use it. That's just one example. Salesforce, that's a tool that a lot of sales teams use now, and business development teams. It's very expensive, but you can go in, you can even go on the Salesforce website and you can take tutorials. So at least you're familiar with the technology and the jargon. We've talked about getting on LinkedIn to show your tech savvy. Learning and refreshing your skills before you apply for the job is really important. Get it on your resume that you have the basic skills. How do you apply them how do you learn or apply skills before you actually go out and try to find a job? Volunteering is a great way to do it. So we call it smart volunteering, aligning your career goals with your volunteer efforts. So if you want to learn how, if you feel you're a marketing person and you feel like you need to learn how to update websites using WordPress, which is a lot of what small businesses use, volunteer for an organization, get them on WordPress and create a website for them, or create a newsletter for them using Constant Contact, which is another software that a lot of small businesses use for marketing. That's a great way to sort of keep your skills sharp. And then you can go into an interview, and you can actually say that you used the skill or you've used the technology, and you can give an example. Sometimes you can even show the product. The more that you can talk the jargon, show work samples and products in an interview, the better. So for example, when I ask people, tell me about your Excel skills, a reentry candidate will often say, oh, my Excel skills, well, they're pretty good. A good candidate will say to me, I use Excel for basic data entry. I also use simple formulas. I can link spreadsheets. I can create graphics. A more advanced candidate would say to me, I can use pivot tables, VLOOKUPs, HLOOKUPs, if-thens. Once you can give me the jargon, then I'm not worried about your technology skills anymore. Resumes, lots of questions about resumes. So there are two types of resumes. There's the typical chronological resume that starts with your most recent employer first, and then goes through, and then you have bullets underneath each employer and job title with the most recent first, bullets, and then you go down to your next employer, et cetera, et cetera. The functional resume is the resume that highlights your skills first, communication skills, analytical skills, and then at the bottom of the resume is a very brief listing of the company, the job title, and the years you worked there, sort of your employment history. There are pros and cons to both of these resumes. A chronological resume is going to show your gap. No matter how you do it, it's going to show your gap. The difficulty the difficulty for a career reentry professional is that it makes the gap more obvious. The advantage is that it's easier to figure out your story. As a hiring manager, a chronological resume, I can figure you out much faster than I can with a skills-based resume. When I have to go, you accomplished this in under communications? Well, where did you do that? When did you do that? How long were you there? It's much more difficult in a functional resume. But having said that, for those of you that have been out of work for probably more than 5 years, and your volunteer work is much more relevant to what you want to do and to demonstrating the skills that you have, a functional resume may, and I say may, be a better resume for you. And the one thing that I would say here in terms of resumes is that you give your resume to 10 different people, they're going to give you 10 different opinions. So you've got to own your resume. And by owning your resume, you also have to own your gap. We tell people on resumes not to overstate or acknowledge your gap and or draw attention to your gap. Sometimes people give them funky little titles like head of household or chief whatever household operator. We prefer that you don't do that. I like for people to keep the substance of their prior jobs and don't make sure that what you bring to the table in those higher level jobs, even if they were older jobs, that if those are most significant to what you want to do next, keep them front and center. So here in this first bullet, where the profile of the old resume, there used to be the objective section was where you would say, I am looking for a XYZ job in an XYZ environment where I can use my XYZ skills. That is passé. Now, at the top of a resume, and I would say to you, what's really important is if you have a chronological resume, you have a profile at the top. And I think this is so important for transitioning and reentry professionals. The profile is basically 3 to 5 sentences, maybe a little longer, maybe not. Sometimes it has a couple of bullets that highlight key competencies or key skills. Sometimes it might have even job titles associated with it to draw somebody's attention to what it is that you want to do. But the profile is basically, if I didn't read anything else in your resume, would I understand by reading your profile what you bring to the table? And the profile is an excellent opportunity for those of you that are transitioning to state that. So you are a XYZ professional you are a professional with XYZ skills eager to transition to. This is also a great opportunity for those with career gaps to acknowledge it in a very positive way. Eager to transition to blank, blank, blank after a career break. I wouldn't highlight the number of years. I wouldn't highlight why you are on career break, but I would just say, I'm ready. That's what you're saying. I am ready. I'm eager to re-enter the workforce after a career break in XYZ field or using XYZ skills. That is critical. So another change in terms of resumes is that there's a much bigger focus now on accomplishments. Employers hire you because you had a challenge. They hire you because they have a challenge or an opportunity or a problem that they have to solve. And so by highlighting accomplishments on your resume as opposed to duties is critical for you to get the notice of an employer. Absolutely include volunteer work. For those of you who are transitioning, or if you have substantive volunteer work, you might want to consider putting the volunteer work before the professional experience. Or if you have such significant volunteer work that is specialized and is in the same area, you can put that volunteer work in your professional experience section. I would just be clear to note that it was truly volunteer and not paid. For others, volunteer work is simply showing that you weren't sitting around eating bonbons while out of work. And it can go below the professional experience and it can be more simplified. So what I always tell people is don't put the 20 million things you did as a volunteer on your resume. It dilutes all the good stuff. Just put the leadership roles and put the roles that are most relevant to what you want to do. And of course, include any new technical skills and any proficiencies you have. And even if you've taken classes, you might want to put that up up at the top of your resume in your profile. Okay, in terms of interviews, what has changed since your last interview? Phone and video interviews are the norm now, especially for first interviews. Again, on our website, there's a great worksheet on that. Behavioral interviews are very common. Those are interviews in which you are going to be asked something very specific. It usually starts with, tell me about a time when, for example. Tell me about a time when you had a very difficult customer. What did you do? What was the problem? And what did you do to resolve the problem? So a behavioral interview, you can't BS the interview. You have to come up with a very specific example to prove that you have the competency that they are looking for. There's also a push towards skills testing and other types of testing as part of the interview process. So you might be asked to take a personality test or a proficiency test, or even to do an exercise. Another big takeaway here for you is to remember to always start, and this is not just for interviewing, it's for networking, it's for any conversation you have with somebody about looking for work. Always start with your skill set and with your successes, not with your gap. So don't talk about you can talk about that, you're excited to explore opportunities, but talk about what you bring to your table, not about your gap. And you'd be surprised, that sounds very logical, and people always say to me, oh, of course. 9 times out of 10, when we interview reentry candidates, they apologize for the amount of time off, and they feel that they have to explain it and to state why they were out for so long. What you need to do is instead consider it an opportunity that you have. Let's face it, a lot of people don't have an opportunity to take a career gap. So be proud of it. And often you can start and say, you know, I left the workforce. I was at the height of my career. I had a great job, but I also had the opportunity to leave, and I took advantage of it, and I chose to leave, and it was a great experience for me. But now I'm excited to get back in, and this is what I want to do. So that's what's really important. When you have a gap because of having raised your children, you need to indicate that you're committed to going back and that you have the support of your family. If you have a gap because of a personal health issue or a gap because you are caring for an aging family member, it's really important for you to acknowledge it without going into personal detail. So to acknowledge it without any emotion to it, and to clearly state that the issue's been resolved and that you're ready to get back in. It's very common these days for people to have gaps because of elder care responsibilities. So I don't think at all it's a bad thing to state it, but just make sure that you state that that you have support in place or that the issue has been resolved. Okay, quickly moving on to networking. I get questions all the time about targeting your resume, keyword searches, all of these online systems, and frustration over being overlooked for those types of jobs, or for being overlooked by those online systems. What I would say to people all the time, what I really want to emphasize to you today, is that your resume, for the most part, does go into a black hole when you submit them through online systems. What's really important for you to understand is that, and I think this statistic is probably low, 80% of jobs are found through one-on-one personal contact, networking with other people. 20% of jobs are filled by those job boards or through your online submissions. And in many of those cases, somebody's already been identified for those jobs when they're posted, and often you're going to get weeded out because of your gap, or if you're transitioning, you're going to have a lot of keywords on your resume that might not fit what you want to transition to, and you're going to get weeded out. So what that means is you are far likely to find work by talking to people. Telling people that you need a job is probably the worst thing. It puts too much pressure on them. It makes you sound desperate, but you can at least say to people, hey, I'm exploring career possibilities. I would love to talk to you. I'd love to learn more about what you do. I love your company. I'd love to learn more about what your company does. I value your advice. I'd like to talk to you about what any advice you have about the types of technology skills I need to gain to stay relevant in the PR industry, etc. Those are the things, the way that you need to talk to people. Having coffee, being courteous of people's time, but talking to people is the most important thing that you can do. So referrals are huge. Asking people, when you talk to somebody, they're going to most likely, if you ask, or even if you don't, they're going to connect you to somebody else who might know you might have a job for you. And don't forget to remember that people who you worked for 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they remember you as your professional self. So go back to them with the confidence that they know what your skills are. And remember that the people who worked for you are probably now in positions to hire. And so don't forget about the people who were below you. And even if you want to transition altogether to a new industry, those people know your value, they trust you, they are far more likely to refer you to other people than if you were just to network cold. So start with your old professional network and start with your personal network. It's the most powerful professional network is your personal network. Other reentry or networking strategies for reentry. We've talked about this going back to school, about smart volunteering. One that I would just pursue here is be open to temp work or to project work, to volunteering to do a project for a friend of yours who owns their own consulting firm, just to get that experience and to get something that you can talk about. But also, people will learn your value, and people often get hired when they volunteer their services initially. Internships are also a great way of doing it. Our company has a internship program. We actually only look at people who have more than 10 years gap and with really rusty technology skills. And time again, they come in, they gain the confidence, and they prove themselves. So ask, ask local, in your neighborhoods are owners of small businesses. Ask for the opportunity. You'd be surprised. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit here about confidence. How do you build confidence? It is the biggest barrier to success, to getting back in. The first one I would say was most important is being aware of that negative self-talk, that junk in your brain that's telling you, oh my gosh, I've been out for so long, I'm rusty. If you go in projecting that, you will not get hired. So it's really important to become really familiar with that resume, to be able to talk the details and not to say to somebody, gosh, it's been so long, I don't remember. That's really important. Be positive, again, about leaving the workforce. If you inject that positivity in your pitch, you are going to come across as confident. And everybody wants to hire somebody who's confident. Be proud of what you've done on Career Break. Oftentimes people talk about their volunteer work, they downplay it. They say it's just volunteer work. You need to think about it as, imagine that you were getting paid $100 an hour to do what you did, and talk about it that way. Your successes are your successes, even if they were 10 years ago. If you were a manager 10 years ago, you still have the skills to be a project manager. So talk about your accomplishments as if they happened yesterday, and the person listening to you will forget that it happened 10 years ago. Sharpen your skills through classes, through volunteering, through internships. Find a mentor, a coach, find somebody to do this with, to job search with, to hold you accountable. And consider the fact that you're here today is a great way for helping your confidence as well. Okay, more. I think we have one more poll question.
Yes. So the last question is, what is most important to you as you think about re-entering or transitioning? I'll give a few more seconds for people to answer. Looks like most of the thoughts are in, so I'll close the poll. Show that it's about 50-50 split between flexibility in schedule, hours, and/or location, and job satisfaction, including work culture, environment, and mission, with a few people, 5%, interested in compensation, and no one on the call cares the most about job title or level.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. So basically, we have gone out and surveyed hundreds of people like you, and their top two priorities is the flexibility and the culture or the mission, doing something they feel good about or working for a company they feel good about. So you're really on, this group is really on target there. So for that reason, you know, you're attractive because you're going to be excited about the company or about the role. And because the hours and the hours and the location are high priorities to you, having flexible hours, having work close to home, you value that as part of your compensation package. And so you're often willing to negotiate your salary compensation in a way that's attractive to the employer. So remember that when you go out. And I would leave with this. I always say to our candidates that sometimes finding flexible work, finding that first job after a career break might not be your rock star job. It might not be your favorite job, but it's a stepping stone to that rock star job. And sometimes it's like the bow and arrow effect. Sometimes you have to take a step back to launch yourself forward. So as you start this search, remember or think about what's most important to you. And as you go ahead and search, there might be trade-offs, but they're not forever. So maybe right now, in order to get that job with that flexible schedule, with that location close to home, or a meaningful job, maybe you do take a step back in terms of responsibilities or in terms of salary. But it doesn't have to be that way, especially if you're smart about choosing a company that's growing or a nonprofit that is growing. There's always opportunities within companies for growth if you can prove yourself. And so don't let that be a roadblock for you, because there are trade-offs, but they aren't forever. Lastly, before we go into questions, I just want to throw out there this slide. This will be available to you, but these are some resources for you for finding flexible work. For those of you that are really interested in part-time, there's a lot of connection platforms out there. There are a lot of companies that work with women reentering the workforce and men. And these are resources that give you links to those connections. And then how to register. We work with candidates in both the Boston and DC metro areas. Many of you are not in that area, so I won't spend too much time on this. But again, our website is here for those of you that are in the Boston and DC metro areas. We would love to see your resume. There is no cost. There's no obligations. We take resumes of all shapes and sizes, and we've hired a lot of great candidates with bad resumes, so don't let the resume be your roadblock to reentry. And here's my contact information, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you, Maura.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sheila. This has been incredibly, incredibly helpful. I want to open up the floor to anyone who might have questions. On the right-hand toolbar, if you have it minimized, you can expand it. There's a questions tab, so if there are any questions on your mind, we will be able to stay for a few more minutes to answer a few questions. While some of those are coming in, I was wondering, Sheila, if you could talk a little bit about the benefit of paying the membership cost to join a professional association if you're looking to transition into a new industry and you don't necessarily have the professional experience in that industry yet. Is it worthwhile to join an association or to attend a conference? It's often a hefty price tag as an individual. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it looks like there's a lot of people who are interested in transitioning. So I will answer the question and then just give you a couple more tips as well. For that question, I agree. Sometimes some of these professional associations are very expensive. I would attend an event first where you pay $20 or $30 or a free event that they're offering before you pay the membership. So start small. We do that for our own business. We never pay. We don't join a chamber. We attend events first until we figure out if the people at that chamber, for example, are the kinds of people that are going to help us in our business. So I would do the same thing. I think one of the best ways to transition into a new industry is to get involved in that industry association. So a perfect example would be like for human resources, SHRM is like the big HR professional association for HR people. They've got local chapters. Go to your local chapter, help them organize their events. You will meet more people by organizing the event, by securing the speakers, by sitting at the registration table, and by helping to market the event than you will by just joining a membership fee. So pick and choose what organizations you think would be most helpful to you, and then get actively involved. And they'll often let you do that for free. They're always in need of help. So that would be my first tip. My second tip with the transition, because I know there was a lot of questions about this, age discrimination is, I'll tell you right now, it's out there. And when you're trying to transition at a older age, it is difficult. So my suggestion to you is this. Be very clear of what your transferable skills are. Sell those transferable skills. You know what the connection is. You know how your skill from a prior job, a prior work experience could be helpful to wherever you want to go, to this new industry or new environment. But sometimes you have to educate the employer and help them make those connections. So you need to go a little bit of a step further, not just tell them what skills you have, but tell them why you think it would be helpful to them. So help them make those connections. The second thing is if you are transitioning and you have zero experience in what you're transitioning to, you really need to volunteer and to get to prove to them that you're passionate about what it is that you want to do next. So get some volunteer experience under your belt, or do a project for free, or get some free consulting experience under your belt. And then lastly, related to that transition too, is because of age discrimination, you need, first of all, it's out there, but if you act frustrated and you act like you are down and out about it, that projects and the employer won't hire you. But if you go in and you're dressed professionally and you're hip and you're smiling and you exude an energy to you, you act younger, you feel younger, and people will love your energy and your vibe, and they are much more likely to consider you.
That's great, thank you. Another question that came out was a typical timeline for the search from beginning to end.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be perfectly honest with this one. We literally have reentry candidates that come into our network, and they get interviewed and they get a job within a week. And we have candidates that have been in our network for 5 years, and we've just placed them. So it is really, there is not an average time. What I would say though is that the more committed you are to keeping the job search process front and center in your own list of priorities, the more likely you will be in being successful. Sometimes we have candidates that are so eager to reenter, they apply for all of our jobs. They apply for anything. And while you might think that's a good idea, you're actually sending us the message that you don't know what you want. So be very careful about that, and be very careful about saying, oh, I'm open to doing anything. Because when you say that, you almost come across as if you don't know what skills you bring to the table. You're better off telling us what your talent is, what your skills are, and, hey, if you're open to admin as part of the job, you can talk about that later on in the interview.
And I have another question about professional designations. So if some of those have lapsed in the time off, how would you recommend handling that? And would you necessarily recommend personally paying?
Yes. So we'll use the CPA for an example. There are employers that require the CPA be active, but you would be surprised. Many of our small businesses don't care that your CPA is active, but they like the fact that you had one. And so what I would do for an inactive designation like a CPA or a PMP, which is the project management certification, I would not put it at the top of your resume with your name, so Sheila Murphy /CPA, but in your profile, I would put as the last sentence, inactive CPA, because I do think it shows, or if you are inactive and currently pursuing the classes in order to get your certification reactivated, I would put that in your profile. And I might even put it down towards your education as well, as part of your education on your resume.
And I have another great question about obtaining references. So if you've been out of the workforce for about 10 or plus years, how would you go about coming up with a list of references for a new job? Would you look to the people you had worked with 10 years ago, or how would you populate that?
Okay, so that's a great question. First of all, you don't need to put it on your resume. References available upon request. You're wasting expensive property there, so I would take it off. Your best reference is going to be a professional reference. So even if you were out of the workforce for 10 years, if you have, and this is where you need, as part of your reentry, to reconnect with your professional network and to start to, hey, can I meet you for lunch? And so that you are back in that person's mindset, talk about what it is that you did, and see if you can find a reference that's either a supervisor, even if they're retired, that's fine, a former supervisor or a former maybe a vendor or customer. Those are all good people for references, even if they are outdated. I would also recommend that you find one more current reference that's not a friend or necessarily a neighbor. They can be a friend, but preferably somebody who you've done work with or for. So the president of the PTA, or the head coach of a team that you were the team manager for. That would also be important. And what you need to do is just, when you give your references, you give the person's name, what their job title is in real life, or if they're retired, and then what is your relationship to that person? I was this person's manager for a soccer team, blah, blah, travel soccer team, or whatever it is. And so I think probably having one from your past and one that's current is probably plenty.
And then the last question I'll ask is, what are ways that you can mention to the employer that you do not need benefits? Can this make you look like a more attractive candidate?
Yeah, I absolutely think it can. I think that you can, my philosophy is to be honest and open about that. Again, you have to hook them with your talent first, right? So don't ever say, hey, I want you to hire me because I don't need benefits. I'd be a good value for your buck. Introduce the fact that you, introduce your skills, and then as part of the conversation, say, listen, I don't need benefits. I don't know if that is something that would be of value to you, but I'm really, in the same way when you're talking about the flexibility piece, I really feel like I have a lot to offer you, but what I would really love is to be able to do this work 30 hours a week or 20 hours a week. I'd be willing to go into the office for 15 of those hours, but that would really help me, and I don't need, expect benefits. So that's a way of saying it to sort of entice them.
Fantastic, thank you. And thank you very much to Sheila for sharing her time and knowledge with us today. If you are interested in working with Sheila, as you saw, her contact information is on the screen. And if you miss it, please just email me here in the alumni office. My email address is just msweeney@holycross.edu. I'll share that along with a copy of the slides because a few people have asked. And thank you for joining us. A recording of this presentation will be available on the Holy Cross Alumni Career Development website next week, and you will receive an email when it's posted. You will also receive a short email survey about this webinar, and I encourage you to share your feedback with us. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me in the alumni office. Our webinar series will continue in early December with a presentation by alumna Betsy Keaty on leveraging the holidays to build your professional network. So a perfect follow-up to this one. Keep an eye out next month for the invitation to register. Again, thanks for joining us and have a great afternoon.